Hello, everyone. On today's podcast episode, I'm going to talk about atheism and hell and why you shouldn't be afraid of God. So, what I mean by atheism, when I talk about atheism, is that I don't really care about atheism that much. As in, I'm not really someone who goes out of my way to try to convert an atheist into a theist because it doesn't really matter to me. I've said it many times before, I don't do debates. I don't want to debate anyone. Because another word for debate is just arguments. I don't like arguing. Arguing, yelling, screaming, these things. At some point in time, it just becomes a sin. At some point in time, it just becomes, insulting each other. And what's the point of this? You don't want drama in your life. It's easier to sin when your life is filled with drama and stress. It's so much easier to sin when your life is filled with stress and drama. There's no need to bring drama to your life, Your life is stressful enough, There's, sin will bring a lot of things to your doorstep. Stressful things to your doorstep. Life itself, will bring a lot of stressful things to your doorstep. Life is stressful enough for most people, So what's the point of going out of your way to bring more stress into your life? What's the point of going out of your way to start arguing and debating with someone? There's no point, So I don't really debate atheists. And I actually don't have a negative view of atheism. Although I believe atheism is atheists are illogical. I still know that, in the end they're still children of God, An atheist at the end of the day is still a child of God. Meaning there's still good in them, Everyone still has a little bit of good in them. Some people have more good in them than others. Some people are kinder than others. But in the end, there's still a lot of kind atheists out there. Not every atheist is a lunatic. Even though I believing in atheism is an illogical, is an illogical belief. And, it is illogical to be an atheist. It doesn't mean someone who's an atheist is always illogical. There's a reason why they're illogical when it comes to atheism. Some people are illogical when it comes to atheism because, it's when you become something without logic, it's hard to get out of it using logic. You have to come out of it on your own. You have to figure out a way out of atheism on your own. It's hard to truly trick someone out of atheism. You have to use you have to manipulate them out of atheism. And manipulation and trickery is a sin. So the only thing you can do is just let them figure out, their own lives. You can preach to them, but you just know that it's not a matter of logic. It's not a matter of words. They'll come, whether they come to it on their own or they don't, that's the best you can do. You just have to accept that, many atheists are lost cause. There's no point in trying to convert an atheist because an atheist doesn't pay attention to logic. Some people, they're only atheists because their girlfriend is an atheist, Their girlfriend is an atheist, and if they're not atheists, the girlfriend will break up with them, That's all. That's the reason why they're atheists. Or it's the opposite. Their boyfriend is an atheist, and if they don't, if they're not atheists, the boyfriend will break up with them. That's the only reason why they're atheists, And you just have to accept that, It is illogical to become an atheist just because somebody else around you is an atheist. But that's usually how people become atheists, They follow someone else into atheism. Because you can't logically just fall into atheism on your own. You're either an illogical person or you're a follower of an illogical person. You follow the illogical person to become an atheist, Someone is an atheist, you became an atheist because of them. That's the only reason why. So I don't really have a problem with atheism. Some people are pretentious atheists. I mean, some people are pretentious atheists or fake atheists. They're only pretending to be an atheist, but the truth is, they still believe in God. But if they don't pretend to be an atheist, it's they could lose their relationship, they can lose their friendships, you know, they can even get fired from their job, they can become homeless. So they have to pretend to be an atheist, you know, because what can they do? But that's how life works. Everyone has their own situation. Everyone has their own, their own story. They have their own life to live, and life is very difficult as it is. So I won't blame anyone for becoming an atheist. If that's how you survive in life, is how you survive. If you die if you're not an atheist, or if your life will be ruined if you're not, chances are your life will not be ruined if you're not an atheist. But you believe your life will be ruined if you're not an atheist. So you stick to atheism because of that. But this is how life works. I've met a lot of kind atheists in my life. So I really can't say, all atheists are evil villains. That's not true. You know, Atheists are still people. At the end of the day, they are still people. So, they're good atheists, they're bad atheists. Some people are kind, some people are not kind. And, that's the same thing with theists. People who believe in God. They're kind people who believe in God, and they're evil people who believe in God. So, whether you're hanging out with atheists or hanging out with Christians or theists, there's really not much of a difference between the two. You know why? Because the Bible says most people will go to hell than go to heaven. There are more people who will go to hell than go to heaven. That should tell you something. That should tell you that most Christians will go to hell. Most theists will go to hell. Whether they believe in God or not, it doesn't matter. Your actions determine whether you go to heaven or not just your belief. Just believing in God does not allow you, does not give you permission to start doing evil deeds. Just believing in God does not mean you should start killing people for fun. Torturing people alive, manipulating people, tricking people, scamming people, stealing from people, and all the evil things in the world. Just because you believe in God does not mean you should do them. And what I noticed, I used to be a youth pastor. A youth teacher. I used to teach children. Not a pastor. I was never a pastor though. Don't quote me on that. I used to teach children, in school back in the day. But at church back in the days. But I stopped, after a while, I stopped going to church because I realized that most people who come to church come to church not to serve God, but for a different reason. They each have their own reason for coming to church. Some come to church just to look for, just to get into a relationship. Some come to church to look for friends, And that's, that mindset of coming to church for your own, your own desires instead of to serve God. Do you really think you go to heaven if you go to church? Instead of going to church to serve God, you're going to church to look for a relationship. Do you really think you go to heaven if you go to church? If you're going to church to look for a relationship instead of serving God. If you go into any house of God, whether whether you're Muslim, a Christian, a Catholic, or a Jew, if you go to any house of God and you're not going there to serve God, but to look for a relationship, you're going there for the wrong reasons. The house of God is there to, you go to the house of God to serve God, to worship God, to understand the world from God's point of view. You don't go there to, you don't treat the house of God as a club. You don't treat the house of God as a dating site, a dating website. That's not where you should be looking for relationships. You shouldn't be looking for relationships, it means you're double-minded. You're a manipulator. You're manipulating, you're tricking people who go there into thinking you're going there to serve God, when the truth is you're going there for something else. And if you get punished by God for that, you can only blame yourself. No one, and the worst part of it is, or the funniest part of it is that since most people will go to hell then go to heaven, it means most of the people you go to church to look for are usually sinners. Meaning, your chance of finding any good person, any good man, isn't going to increase by going to church. Matter of fact, it may even have the opposite effect. God may punish you for going to church to look for a relationship instead of going to church to serve God. You're going to church for the wrong reasons. Do you really think God would, reward you for that? Do you think God should reward you for going to church, not to serve God, not to worship God, but to look for a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a best friend? If that's your reason for going to church, is to look for a relationship, chances are you're not going to find a good man there. Chances are you're not going to find a good woman there. Why? Because the odds are already against you. And now, the odds of finding a good person in this world filled with sinners is already against you. And then you add another factor into it. The other factor is what? Blasphemy. You're going against God's will. You're going to the house of God to look for a relationship. So now you're making matters worse. If you were looking for a relationship outside of church, your chances of finding a good person is already, a non-sinner is already very low. And then you go into a house of church, house of God, to look for a person. What are the chances of you finding someone, valuable? Not that high. Because God knows what you're doing. God can read your thoughts because you're God. So do you think God will reward you for going to church for all the wrong reasons? Should God reward you for going to church, not to worship Him, but for something else? Should you be rewarded for that? And that's one of the things I found out, going to church is that, when I used to go to church, is that many people do not come to church for, to worship God. They have their own ulterior motives. They do it for a whole different reason. And that's what you need to watch out for. Because there's a verse in the Bible. I think it was during the story of Job, right? Remember Job? Yeah. There was a verse in the Bible that states that when God called all His sons, all the sons of God God called all His children to Him for a meeting. And guess what? Satan showed up. Satan wasn't invited, but he showed up anyways. Do you know what that tells you? Is that Satan doesn't follow directions. Satan doesn't care that God's there. Satan will show up anyways. Do you know what that means? It means that at in the house of God, where all the children of God gather, Satan will be there. Satan will be in the midst of children of God. So when all the Christians gather together, Satan will be there. When all the Muslims gather together, Satan will be there. When all the Jews gather together, Satan will be there. When all the Catholics gather together, Satan will be there. When all the Protestants gather together, Satan will be there. When all people gather together, Satan will be there. Because that's what Satan's job is. Satan is the adversary. That's what Satan means. Satan is our adversary. So his job is what? To spread this, to spread confusion and chaos, to trick you into doing evil. So when you go to church, just know that Satan will be there. So you have to be careful of who you bring to your house. Because there's so many news articles out there of pastors killing people, pastors raping people, pastors, committing crimes, pastors stealing from people, pastors stealing from the church, clergymen stealing from the church, clergymen raping people, churches getting robbed, churches getting shot, church members getting killed. You just have to know what you're getting yourself involved in. Is that in the house of God, where the children of God congregate, Satan will be there. Satan is not afraid of going where God is, because God is a merciful God. Because God is merciful, Satan uses that to his advantage. And God also uses that to his advantage. God knows how Satan behaves. So God uses Satan as an adversary, your adversary. Satan is there to test you. It's part of the test of, that God created. If you fail God's test, you know where you go to. You go to hell. Atheists have already failed the test of God. Why? Because they've been manipulated by Satan into believing that God doesn't exist. Satan does not use logic. Satan only knows illogical arguments. And if illogical arguments does not work, Satan will start to use manipulation, tricks, and coercion. This is the realm of Satan. The realm of Satan isn't logic, but illogical arguments. Satan will never use logic, because logic goes against Satan. Logic goes against Satan. Do you know why? It's illogical to rape someone. Yes, Satan will tell you to rape someone. It's illogical to steal. Yes, Satan will tell you to steal. Will coerce you. Will trick you into stealing. Satan's path isn't a path of logic. It's a path of illogical arguments. That's why Satan is a fallen angel. And fallen angels can only use fallacies. Fallacies. They will never be able to use logic. And fallacies are what? Illogical arguments. That's what fallacies are. Fallen angels are only capable of using fallacies. They will never be able to use logic, because the realm of logic goes against their very essence. It goes against everything they know. Logical people believe in God. Illogical people do not. Logical people go to church to worship God. Illogical people go to church for relationships, to find a mate, or even to look for an enemy. Yes, there are people who go to church because they found someone they wanted to kill, or they found someone they hated. They realized that person goes to the church, so they decided to go to church just to mock him. Right at church, you go to church to get into arguments and fights with people. You're not going to church to serve God. You're going to church to argue and fight with people. There are people like that who go to church not to serve God, but for the equal and opposite. For everything else. These are illogical people. So you have to be careful. If you're a churchgoer, just know that most of the people around you are illogical people. That, when it comes to, or even if they're not illogical people, just know that Satan can easily manipulate them using illogical arguments. Satan can easily manipulate them using fallacies. Just like Satan manipulated Eve into eating the apple. Satan can easily, using illogical arguments. We said we'll not use logical arguments, right? Because logical arguments go against Satan. It's illogical to eat the apple when God has told you not to eat it. So the only thing Satan will use to trick Eve into, eating the apple, what? Are illogical arguments. That's how fallen angels work. The fallen angels can only use fallacies. They can only use illogical arguments. Atheists can only use fallacies. They can only use illogical arguments to trick you into believing that God doesn't exist. And if that doesn't work, they use manipulation and bullying and coercion into turning you into an atheist. These are the only thing they can do. These are the only thing they can do. But don't worry too much. If you're afraid of hell, you hear the phrase that most people go to hell and only a few will go to heaven. You just have to know that God is a merciful God. When they say blasphemy when the Bible says they're unforgivable sins, right? Well, guess what? Unforgivable sin just means that it's a sin that, there's sins in this world that can be forgiven, meaning you won't be punished for it. And then there's a sin that's unforgivable. It means every time you commit that sin, you'll be punished for it. That's what unforgivable sin means. It doesn't mean you'll be a sinner for the rest for eternity, or you'll be marked for eternity. It just means that these are sins you can't wiggle your way around. That's what unforgivable means. God is not evil. God is a merciful God. It means even if you go to hell, you won't be in hell for eternity. God will find a way for you. Even Satan has done far worse than what you've done. Yet Satan is here on earth. God is still merciful to Satan. Eve did just as much as you did. And did God kill Adam and Eve immediately? No. That should tell you that God is not a evil being. God will give you chances to turn a new leaf. Even in hell, God will find a way for you, because you're God. Think things through real quick. Do you think it makes logical sense to punish you for eternity? Do you really think it makes logical sense for you to be in hell for eternity? Would you torture yourself for eternity? If you commit a crime, right? Do you think it's logical to torture yourself for eternity? Most people say no. It doesn't make any logical sense to punish me for eternity, right? Guess what? God is you. So why would God punish himself for eternity? God is omnipresent. So God goes through everything you go through. All the pains in life that you go through, God experiences it with you. God is not there in heaven watching down from heaven. God is right there. Every choice you make in life, God is going through the motions with you. God knows everything you do. Every pain and suffering you've been through, God experiences it with you, along with you. This is why God is merciful. God is the only one that can understand all the pain you've been through. God is the only one that can truly understand who you are. This is why if everyone ever betrays you, God will never betray you. Because God knows things from your point of view. God knows life from your point of view. This is why God is a benevolent God. Because it goes through the same pain that you go through. It experiences the same torturous experiences that you've been through in life. All the heartbreaks that you've been through, God was there experiencing it with you. All the sorrows that you've been through in life, God was there experiencing the sorrows with you. God is not withdrawn from you, because God is you, and you are God. And God would never torture himself for eternity. So, even in hell, God will find a way for you. As long as you never give up on yourself, God will always help you. Do not give up on yourself, and God will be there to help you. If God can remove sin from heaven, God will remove you from hell. God is the one that makes the rules. And God is a very benevolent God. That means as long as God knows you can change, as long as God knows, there's still good in you. Even if you go to hell, even if most people go to hell, God will find a way to get you out of hell. You don't have to worry too much. Just don't go to hell. Yes, it'll be harder, I don't, I've never been to hell, so I don't know how hell is. But you have to know that from the trace of God in the Bible, from the way God's behaved in the Bible, God is very, very merciful. Even if you die, even if God kills you right now, you have to understand that death is not the end of your being. You are God, and God can never die. That means you can never die. You understand? You are God. God is omnipresent. It means death is an illusion. Death is an illusion. Do not worry about life or death. Worry about yourself. Worry about your life. Worry about being a good person. That's what you need to worry about. God has your back because God sees things from your point of view. Nobody else can see things from your point of view. That's why there's so many misunderstandings in life, That's why some people are crueler to you for no reason because they don't know what you've been through. If they don't know what you've been through, it's easy for them to abuse you for no reason. But God knows what you've been through because God went through it with you. God went through all the stress and agony that you've been through in life. God went through it with you. How can God not be merciful to himself? Think about it. How can God not be merciful to himself? You are God. So don't worry about life or death. Don't worry about hell or heaven. As long as you follow God's will, as long as you decided to change your ways, God will be there to help you because God will always be there with you. Trust in yourself and trust in God. Life is not as hard as you think it is, and God is not as evil as you think it is, as you think God is. God is far more benevolent than you believe He is. He's far more benevolent than you think He is. So, don't worry too much about going to hell, Try to live your life one day at a time, Don't stress too much about life. Don't stress too much about atheism. God is there with them, God will figure out a way for them as well, Nobody's perfect, and God knows that. God knows what they go through in life as well. So God will figure out a way for them as well. Don't worry too much about them. Worry about your life and worry about going to heaven. And worry about being a good person. It's not about going to heaven, it's about being a good person. If you be a good person, it's like water entering the sea. It happens perfectly, There's no, it's just a fluid motion. You would just go to heaven naturally. You'd be like water entering the sea. You'd be like a river naturally flowing into the, into the lake. It's that easy. You will never have to worry about going to hell. As long as you're a good person, you'll never have to worry about going to hell. Don't worry about hell too much. It's not as hard as you think it is. The pastors and the preachers who tell you that, you'll burn in hell for eternity. You're not going to burn in hell for eternity. Although hell will be difficult, right? God does not rule through force and coercion. God will not force you to go to heaven. You have the free will. Since you have the free will to go to heaven or not, using that tactic doesn't work. God won't punish you that severely, There will be punishment, but it won't be as severe, as eternity. Eternity is too much. Because God has to go through it with you. All the pain that you have to go through, God has to go through it with you. All the pain that you've ever been through, God has been through it with you. This is why God is merciful. Because you're a God. God will always be merciful to himself. The people who tell you that, who try to mock you or insult you, or try to, trick you into thinking that God is some sort of evil God that'll make you burn in hell for eternity. These people probably end up going to hell themselves. Why? They're using cruelty. They're trying to manipulate you into becoming a Christian using cruelty and violence. And God is not that cruel. No matter how bad hell is, at the end of the day, you're still a child of God. And God is with you. God will always be with you. Even if you don't believe in God, even if you deny God, even if you disobey God, even if you walk away from God. Because at the end of the day, God is omnipresent and you will always be God. So that's it for today's podcast episode. I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.